right in and ask a question. I prefer that. And also in a lot of business meetings, that's how we do it. It's at first it feels kind of uncomfortable, but it's a good habit to get in the habit of, and I would love for people to ask questions if they have them. So there is a question on the test about attribution error. So I would like for you to be able to talk about what is a fundamental attribution error. And this is the tendency that we have to not focus so much on environmental conditions, but on a person's behavior. And there's somebody that I know this weekend who was driving down to the valley, and right there before Munns Park, she rolled her vehicle over the side of the embankment, way down, and it's just a miracle that she's alive. So if I were doing an internal attribution error, then I would judge her and her driving. She's always a fast driver. She was probably texting. I'm going to make a judgment based on her rather than on on something external like slick roads. So the question on the exam is an internal attribution error. And so that's me blaming her, which I would never do, but it's a good example. And the external attribution would be, oh yeah, those Toyota 4Runners, they have a short wheelbase and they're really easy to roll, or something like that, blaming it on something external to the individual. All right, so I'm gonna talk about chapter 1 for a while. There's quite a few multiple choice or true false questions from chapter 1. And they also talk about the evolution of management thinking. And remember from an earlier conversation and an earlier quiz that when business theories first came about and some of the classic models, we were talking about just straight business, and people are commodities, and we need to turn the lights on stronger so that we can have our workers produce better. So that's the classical approach. And then it wasn't until after the Hawthorne studies and some other things that came about in the public conversation, like a greater emphasis on human rights, that we started to shift from this classical or even scientific model of business to looking at the people, and people matter, and paying attention to what matters to people is an important management trait. And all of this has significantly evolved over the past 100 years. But we still see a whole lot of things with the historical models of business, like clocking in at 8 a.m. and clocking out at 5 p.m. and motivating people with a carrot. All of these go back to some of the earlier thoughts. So why do we study history and this historical struggle? So remember, the historical struggle was people are there to serve us and make us as a company money, as opposed to people are here to make the world better and to have self-fulfillment and things that come about from human rights and workers' rights. So we do study history repeatedly, and it helps us to have a better understanding of not only where we've been, but how can we do better today through strategic thinking. And I'll talk a little more about social, political, and economic changes in the larger society, but this historical struggle is a really important concept. So yeah, it was the things of production, and largely those things were these human beings walking around on two legs, the things of production, and then all of the other supplies. And since then, we have moved toward the humanity of production. And we still have to focus on the things because that's how it gets done. But the humanity, and it took a while to figure this out, but the humanity of production actually led to more successful results in our production. So treating people like humans has brought some really good rewards. Here's a graphic of what I'm talking about. So mostly you need to know that it's not one way or the other. There's certainly been this shift to the humanity, but we still have both at once, and sometimes they push against one another and create conflict or tension. So I don't think there's any names that you need to know, even though Taylor was the father of scientific management. But I would like for you to know what is scientific management. And it's a group of ideas that talk about using science to improve the bottom line or improve the workers' efficiency. And I don't need you to know about Gantt or Gilbreth. I just want you to know scientific management is using science in the workplace. So in chapter 1, we have 3 primary ideas. We have classical management style or scientific management. Then we have bureaucratic organizations and administrative principles. And there are a couple of multiple choice questions. So you need to know what is bureaucratic organizations. Now, the word bureaucratic gets a bad rap. It often means things move slowly, can never get anything done. That's what is known as a bureaucracy. But really, if you strip away a lot of the definitions, it comes down to the point that a bureaucratic organization is focused on rules and regulations. And really, when you focus on rules and regulations, you get things done. And there is a lot that happens from bureaucratic organizations. So this is a leadership and a model of management. Under the bureaucratic organizations, power is a big part of it. So a question that could come up on the midterm related to this would be something along the lines of bureaucratic organizations create more personal freedom. I think we might have even had that on a quiz. I'm not sure. So the answer to that is false, because bureaucratic organizations do not create personal freedom. They create rigidity. And a lot of people, a lot of us, kind of thrive in an environment where we know what the rules are, we know what time we're supposed to clock in, we know what we're supposed to get done, there's no ambiguity. So bureaucratic organizations are successful very often, and it's not bad, it's just a style. And then the last of the 3 is the administrative principles. And I don't care if you know about Henri Fayol, but I do want you to know what administrative principles are. And it's more of a systems thinking. It's more of a holistic look at an organization. So you do have a unity of command. You have clear-cut roles within the organization. And a lot of these principles of management are still a popular part of managing today. And we looked at a lot of these in our most recent chapter, chapter 6. But these 5 functions of management, and these are pretty much what the 6 were that we did last week and put on the deliverable: planning, organizing, commanding, coordinating, controlling. All of these are similar to those 6. We also had communicating and doing that post-mortem, the evaluation afterward. But these are administrative principles. It's a multiple choice question. So just know that it's more of a holistic approach, and bureaucratic is more rules-based. And classic is back to the people, our commodities, the production of things. So these are just 3 things that are all in chapter 1 that are compared. So just a reminder, I have these PowerPoints are also uploaded into the Blackboard Learn if you wanted to go through and look at those. So this definitely was a quiz question, and using your quiz to further study for the midterm is a good idea. But we learned from the Hawthorne studies that it's the treatment of people that actually turned into better results. At first, they were wondering if it was the lighting, what about the conditions made people put out a lot more work. But it turned out that they just felt more valued when they were being observed, and they felt like working harder because they felt like they were important. So these are some of the results that happened from the Hawthorne studies. And this really was the beginning, or right at the start, of the more humanistic type movement toward treatment of employees. So the only thing I'd like you to know on here is theory X and theory Y. And McGregor, who came up with these assumptions, had 2 very different ideas about us. And he said, first, one theory is that most people just hate work altogether. They're doing it because they have to. You have to ride them, you know, to get the kind of work that you want. They cannot be trusted. Oh no, they don't have any self-motivation or ambition. They are just slogs of the wheel that need a whole lot of pushing to get moving. But theory Y is much more favorable to most of us, and that's this idea that work is natural, and we're kind of attracted to the idea of growing as individuals and seeking higher versions of ourselves through through work. And it's true that work does offer a whole lot of personal growth opportunities, and intellectual potential, not to mention social. So theory Y is that we could do even better by giving individuals the tools that they need to help them thrive in the workplace. Because people, it's not that we can't trust them, we can, but we need to provide environments so that they can soar. I definitely am all about theory Y, because theory X is too depressing to, I don't want to live in that world. So then I would like, there is another multiple choice question, and the answer is behavioral sciences approach. So I'd like for you to know what that is so that you can answer the question well. This is more, I mean, it's a rounded, it has feelings in it, and psychology and history and economics, to look at and study human behavior inside of an organizational setting. And if you were taking a behavioral sciences approach and looking at our class, Management 300, at 4 p.m. Monday and Wednesday, you would probably see a lot of interesting things. But for me, having been in pandemic mode like you have too, being able to come back in person and being in groups and having natural light. I mean, there's a whole lot of things that have made the learning a good case study for behavioral sciences approach. And I think a lot of it has to do with connection with other people. So that would be, it's kind of an organizational setting, the FCB, but you could use the behavioral sciences approach to reach a lot of understanding about how people behave and thrive or don't thrive within an environment. So using behavioral sciences and studying how people thrive or don't thrive in certain settings, certain principles have been born, and those are part of the behavioral sciences approach. Matrix organizations as opposed to hierarchies. We'll talk about that in a second with the holacracies. Self-managed teams, culture, and management by wandering around. We haven't talked about that in our regular class period, but it's kind of an interesting idea. And when you are a manager or even a leader, you gather information all the time. And it's not always through words or anything heard. A lot of times it's just observing behavior and observing people's moods and observing people's productivity or lack thereof. Management by wandering around is a component of behavioral sciences because you're studying the science of behavior. So it makes a lot of sense, and it's a really interesting approach. I think there are 2 multiple choice questions on systems thinking. What is systems thinking, and what do I want you to know? So systems thinking is a way of managing. And instead of focusing on a tiny aspect of a company or an organization, it's having a full understanding of the system and all its parts and all its people with their different jobs, including the world around them. And to be able to be a good systems thinker, you have to be understanding of each of the minute details of each part of that system, as well as how they all work together and how the system itself operates within the world. So systems thinking is, I keep using the word holistic because that's a word that's I hear a lot and I use it in my own speech, but holistic is looking at all aspects and understanding the whole organism, if you will, as opposed to just studying stakeholders or just studying ethics. We do those things too, but understanding that a good manager understands what systems thinking is and makes a point of doing that, as opposed to getting caught in the minutia every day, which can happen as well. Take a drink. So W.L. Gore was started here in Flagstaff, and now it's an international company. But they were one of the first holacracies that I knew of. And the picture shows it really well. There's one multiple choice question that deals with holacracy and what is it? And so you should know the definition. It's this decentralized management, and it's the move away from hierarchies. And we've talked about flattened hierarchies in several ways in this class. But for the test, I don't use the term flattened hierarchies. Holacracy is the word that is used, and the picture says it. Yeah, W.L. Gore was one of the first holacracies that I knew, and people either thrived in that environment or they didn't like it at all. And it's because the chain of command is not really clear, and people have a lot of responsibilities at their flattened hierarchical level. So it can create a lot of creativity and flexibility. If you have a new idea, you don't have to go up to that boss who takes it up to their boss, who takes it up to the board of directors. You just talk with people in other groups and you can make things happen a little bit more with more agility. All right, so chapter 2 talked about culture and the environment. And when we're talking about the environment in chapter 2, we're talking about the culture of a place, not so much the environment with the beautiful green trees and recycling and that kind of an environment. So I do want you to know about these dimensions, and I think it was two quizzes ago, but maybe it was only one, where we had the political dimension, the legal political, and a political instability. That would be good to review those two questions in advance of the midterm. So the economic dimension is on there. Rising interest rates. I heard gas prices went up again today. My friend just sent me a screenshot. He filled up his truck in California, and the gas bill was $100. That's part of the economic dimension. And we all do business in this economic dimension. Dimension is just one part of the general environment. So when gas prices go up, it affects all of us. The question on the midterm about the legal political dimension, I think it's talking about laws and regulations. And so you should know that laws are part of the legal political dimension, which if you look at the definition or the title itself, of course, laws are legal, but just a reminder. I'd like for you to know this definition exactly. I'm going to go over here and drink some tea. So chapter 3 is globalization, if you want to go back and look at anything from that. But I do need for everybody to know what exactly is the definition of globalization. I also have bottom of the pyramid on the midterm, and this is also from chapter 3. And it talks about the most poor people in the world and successful corporations helping them. It's not enough to go to a country and pay somebody the going rate. Serving the bottom of the pyramid is trying to lift all ships. So if you're selling or making Samsung and you're in Korea, the bottom of the pyramid concept is that you would try to make some phones available to the people who can't afford even the most basic throwaway phone. And this would be the bottom of the pyramid. And it's an optional thing, and it's starting to gain more momentum in business as organizations have a better understanding of their power. And again, it comes with success, because when you have the means, that's when you're most likely to contribute in this activity of the bottom of the pyramid. Does anybody have any questions so far?
No, thank you.
And if anybody does, please jump right in. So one multiple choice question talks about a multinational corporation and says, a corporation qualifies as an MNC if it has this percentage of total sales from operations in other countries. So you need to know what that percentage is, and it's right here on your screen. So write it down in your notes, because if you know that, then you've got that down. These words come up. Not only do they come up, I think I ask you to write about them. So please know a little bit more than just this little headline here. So an ethnocentric company is pretty much into the way that they do things in their own country. And a polycentric is where you go to another country and you take your business model there and you tweak it a whole lot so that it better fits into the culture of your new city. So this is kind of the opposite of an ethnocentric business. So I'm going to go back one slide real quick. 2 slides. What? Okay, this slide. So multinational corporations have a couple of different ways of doing business. I just talked about ethnocentric and polycentric, but managers, it's all with the global manager. So if a global manager, sometimes what they do is they take the way that it's working in their home country. Let's say it started in the United States like Walmart, and now Walmart is a multinational corporation. So then they move to other countries and open stores, and then they run them in those other countries the same way they did back home. So part of that is ethnocentrism, part of it is the management philosophy. But there are more than one ways of doing that. And one of the other ways is a more polycentric approach. And when you go to another country, you take a little bit of the culture there. Like I've brought up a couple of times that I've seen Starbucks in several of the Asian countries that I've been in, and they were definitely ethnocentric. They look like a Starbucks anywhere except that the menus are in different languages. And Ashley, I don't know if you're here, but they also have, when I was in Thailand, they had Baskin Robbins, and it looked just like a Baskin Robbins here in the United States. So that's more of an ethnocentric approach. And it's not wrong. A lot of people are going to these places because they want a little bit of the other country's culture. But it can become a liability if you're closed-minded. As we've already heard during the first half of our semester, a closed-minded manager is no bueno. We want a manager who is able to think in new ways. These are the most successful managers, and this is the type of management that we need. So again, while ethnocentrism is not bad, it's when you dismiss other cultural values that it can be bad. This is where it gets a bad name, especially if you're talking about communication and you have an ethnocentric approach and you expect, I knew a lady and she was living down in Mexico and she refused to learn the language. And I'm like, are you kidding me? You're living in another country and the language is Spanish. And she just had a high level of ethnocentrism and refused to learn the language. And whatever, not my problem. It's just a clear example of ethnocentricity. I'm sorry, this is a little bit out of order because I already had legal political challenges earlier. But when you think about it, if you're a Baskin Robbins and you're trying to open a new location in Singapore, then you have to open your business within a completely different culture. And now you have the legal and political challenges that happen from opening a business there. You have to hire an attorney who not only knows the language, but knows the laws, and make sure that you can indeed open your business and do so according to the laws of the other countries. So legal political challenges happen in globalization all the time. Earlier this semester, I talked about my 22-year-old nephew who is in Myanmar, or he's not in Myanmar, but he's working in Myanmar and he's trying to get to Myanmar, but he's living in nearby Thailand because Myanmar is closed to foreigners, but he's teaching English to high schoolers in Myanmar at a school there. So that is definitely political instability. They were planning to move there. They had housing in Myanmar, and that fell through because of a political coup. And they're just, fortunately, paying some really cheap rent in Thailand and using the internet to teach all these young people in Myanmar. So political instability for globalization, more than just the example with my nephew, it's a real roadblock at times. So again, chapter 2 is talking about the environment of business. And in the environment of business, you have different types of cultures in different type of organizations. So when I had written that article and it talked about Arizona's hiring woes are here to stay, they talked a lot about trying to get people. But the lady I interviewed said, one of the best things you can do as a would-be employee when you're interviewing for a job is to ask them, tell me an example from the past 2 weeks that exemplifies your company culture. Because the more you can learn about a culture, the more you'll know if you're going to fit in and be happy. An achievement culture is known for being aggressive, cost-cutting, assertive. If you're more of a person that's quiet, then you might thrive in this environment. But these people are going to, the volume of the workplace is just going to be a little bit more because you're going to have people and they're pumped and they have goals and they're going to meet those goals. And this is part of the achievement culture that happens in a lot of businesses. And a lot of jobs that are offered to new graduates thrive with this achievement culture. And sometimes they'll have sales. And this is something to not only know about, but think about yourself and where you fit and where you like and where you would best thrive, both as an employee and as a rising manager. So I do remember we did an assessment a while back, and quite a few people mentioned they're pretty much into the consistency culture. And a lot of people who like routine or rules or a lack of ambiguity, so certainty, they will thrive in a consistency culture. So I think that there's a test question that says something along the lines of, do you think business in 2022 is going to be part of the consistency culture? Or the question is something like that. Do you think we're in the type of business environment right now that brings about solidity and predictability? Or do you think it's wrought with uncertainty and at times ambiguity? So the answer to the question, I hope you would already know, is the latter. That because we're in the middle of a pandemic and this has not happened in over 100 years, and it never happened in our culture the way it is today, that the business culture and the business environment is very uncertain. And we know there will still be business, but we just don't know what it will look like. And we're just changing as we go. So know that it is not consistency culture, and probably the opposite. So developing a global mindset. We talked about this a while ago about how a manager can have a global mindset. And when you picture it, picture yourself. You're going to another country and you're tasked with opening an office for your company. Do you go in there and you try to tell everybody that we're going to do it the way we do it in Arizona? Or do you say, how is it done here? And you evaluate the people. You look at the entire system, systems thinking, and you take a step back and look at it broadly. This is a part of a global mindset. And what I'm especially asking you on the midterm is this. And I want you, this is one of the questions that I'm asking you to write about. So in your notes, write, be able to write about cultural intelligence. And so this is near the end of chapter 3 in our book. And it has 3 specific qualities. And we also talked about emotional intelligence in class, and this is similar, but we're talking about it more in terms of globalization. So doing business with companies around the world. So first you have to have the mind, the intellect, to be able to see and to be able to learn when you don't know something, and the ability to pick up on clues, because so much of managing is unspoken. It's the managing by walking around. That's a great example for the cognitive aspect of cultural intelligence. You're learning by absorbing and also reading and training when needed, but using your mind to learn the situation as soon as possible. And emotional intelligence, I put self-confidence here because that's pretty much the easiest way to think about it. It's much deeper than that. But when you think about it, when you find yourself in a work situation, if you lack the self-confidence to be present and to be a leader, like if you're questioning yourself too much and worried about how you're appearing to others, which we all do that. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying there has to be a certain degree of this emotional intelligence, or just understanding that I'm a human being and I do have a lot of information. I don't know everything, but I know a lot. This is an emotional intelligence, which is one of the components of cultural intelligence. And then the physical component, this is the one that I like because in my studies, I often look at nonverbal communication. It's one of my favorite things to study, intercultural nonverbal communication, because people say more with their body than they say with their words. And you do too. So you need to first understand that, but then also be able to execute it, if you will. I mean, that sounds really manipulative, and it's not. It's more like you're talking to somebody and they're having the worst day of their lives. You don't smile and hop around. You roll your shoulders down, maybe cross your arms. You look at them, but not too much. This is all a part of cultural intelligence. And even though we do have a lot of different interpersonal and communication gaps with communicating with people from other countries, a lot of the things are the same. And so physical aspect is a big part of cultural intelligence. So I do have a question about Hofstede's value dimensions, and I think it has to do with the bottom one. So masculinity and femininity. Masculinity is more affiliated with a low context culture, like the United States. We shake firmly, we look in the eyes, and we wrap it up. Femininity is more about taking care of things by supporting others and building relationships. So it's a completely different way of doing things. And most of us and most countries are not one or the other, but they're very much in one camp or the other. And then there's some overlap. I mean, that's just part of being a human. So masculinity is going to be more affiliated with individualism, and femininity is going to be more collectivism, which is high context versus low context. And it's really interesting. Back to the behavioral sciences approach, watching this in action is really interesting. And maybe you'll do it too. Uncertainty avoidance. We've talked about this and it shows up on the midterm too. I have another example. Hopefully it's on the next slide. Yeah, it is. So high certainty avoidance. If you're a person like this, then you're going to be one of those people that likes a consistency culture. And you're also going to do whatever you can to try to minimize the occurrences of surprises. And when you plan something, it's very methodical. This kind of reminds me of university life, it's not very easy to make a change at a university because a lot of the culture is embedded in the way that it has always been and the way that it should be. And those are nice goals, but it doesn't allow for a lot of agility and management. So the opposite of that is a low uncertainty avoidance. So Vanessa, in answer to your question, of the 5 questions that I put on the exam that have a little scenario, low uncertainty avoidance or high uncertainty avoidance is part of that. They're kind of behavioral, those questions.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. Where do you think the United States is on this? High or low? Somebody unmute and guess. Or no, don't guess, just say whatever. Well, we're not really strong. Go ahead.
I would say high uncertainty avoidance.
That's a good guess, but it's the opposite. We're more affiliated with the low, and probably because we're the home of a lot of tech. And when I say tech, I don't just mean computers and the web, and I also mean electric vehicle manufacturing, energy production. We do a lot of things that are more leading edge. And so that's probably why we rate a little bit higher in the low uncertainty avoidance. All right, more on culture. And again, this is another one of those questions that has a little scenario and you pick the best answer in a multiple choice question. Are they in a low context culture or a high context culture? Hopefully these are pretty straightforward to you. And like another example I used earlier, there is a continuum for this too. And I think as more time passes and the more we have technology companies leading the economy in bigger ways, that we're going to be switching a little bit of this. It's going to be moving away from being known for being a low context culture. So you should also know that Canada, even though they're more collective than we are, they're known as low context culture, and so is the United Kingdom or Great Britain. All right, so real quick, a utilitarian approach, that's the greatest number, the greatest good for the greatest number of people, and that's one approach for making a decision. And this comes out of chapter 4, where we're talking about ethics. And it's important because in ethical decision making as a manager, there are a whole bunch of different ways to look at a scenario. And that's why we studied these different philosophies, because you need to know which one you like individually. That's important to know. But also when you go and you start and you're working at an organization, what is it that they do? Are they all about individualism, or are they more about the moral rights approach, which is kind of like human rights to me, because people have divine rights and that falls under the moral rights approach. And part of that is not being able to work your employees for 20 hours a day. That would be a part of a decision that was born out of a moral rights approach. And then the last one is a practical approach. So there's 4 to know, and those show up in multiple choice questions. So be able to understand the difference between them is about all you need to do. So practical. If I'm doing it, my competitor is doing it, and everybody else in my industry is doing it, it's probably fine. And that's going to be the practical approach. Looking at the world around you and making a decision based on the way that things are is one version, one way to say the practical approach. Any questions on this? Check the time. Got it. No. Okay. So I think there are 2 questions on the test relating to these stages of moral development. And if you're in my ethics class right now, then it's one less thing you have to study in this class, because we're also talking about these a lot in the other class because it's big. This is chapter 4, And this is managing ethics. The ethics of managing is another way. So the pre-conventional level. Remember, this was divided into 3 stages. And the pre-conventional level was where people were very authoritarian. So if you're taking notes, write that down. Authoritarian in the pre-conventional level. Probably kind of ego-based if we're going to be looking at it through the lens of management, which is exactly what we're doing. If I'm a pre-conventional manager, I'm going to walk around, or maybe I will strut. Yeah, that's what I'll do. I'll strut around and make sure everybody's following my style of management and doing it exactly the way I told them to do, or they're going to be punished. This is an example of a manager who is operating at the pre-conditional level. Oh, and I'm also going to brag a lot because that's the kind of manager I am. If I'm a post-conventional level manager, this is the high, this is like a pyramid, and the highest level is post-conventional. So it's up there that you get the servant leaders. And if you've ever worked with a servant leader, or maybe you are a servant leader, these people are just amazing. They're really caring about others and the organization more than they care about themselves. I mean, it's not that they don't care about themselves or do self-care and all the things that managers need to do, but they really put the values of others in the highest spot. And so it's kind of rare. What do you need to know about the post-conventional level? They operate with a really high value system, and it's just a small portion of the workplace that reaches this post-conventional level. And everybody else, including myself, I mean, sometimes I do post-conventional, but most of the time I'm in the conventional level. That's where we move around in the world. This is where our laws are. This is where our workplace is. This is where we have regulations to follow. Just the structure of the world and our social relationships, everything is happening in this conventional level. So pre-conventional is concerned about punishment, ego. The conventional level is more of a system. I think that's a good way to look at that. And the law is part of this. And then post-conventional is a higher law. So if you become a servant leader, I think that's excellent. Any questions on this? Here's a little table. I know when I showed this in class, it was hard to see. It's a little better now, depending upon what device you're on. Rules to avoid punishment, obligations of the social system and the law, level 2, and level 3, I said a higher law. So the common good, justice. Okay, so if you're taking notes, I would just write this whole definition down, or write the word down and look it up in the book. So many people in other parts of the world look at the United States as an example of capitalism, and they say it like it's a dirty word. But conscious capitalism is kind of a counter to that, because we're now talking about making the world a better place. We're talking about the physical environment. We're talking about helping poverty. We're talking about ending hunger. We're talking about using our profits to improve the world. So, well, I'm actually, I've always been in business and I don't see it as being a big negative, but I'm sure you've heard discussion from people in other countries as dissing the American way of life. But this conscious capitalism is a really nice spin. And I have seen us moving more